became familiar with the concept of the non-op, no-ho, no-low tranny, one who eschews, any sort of hormones or surgery, preferring to remain unaltered physically while still living in their chosen gender, or lack thereof. Which was where genderqueer came in, those who rejected notions of male and female altogether. You notice this group was far more likely to be genetic, female by birth, with some notable exceptions, of course. There were exceptions to everything. Across the board, but particularly from the genderqueer sector, there was an unmistakable hatred of the so-called binary gender system. It was viewed as repressive and restricting. Personally, you'd never felt so free as when you traded the male for the female role. In fact, it didn't feel so much like a trade as a liberation. After transitioning, after changing what most people saw as the most basic and immutable factor of identity and role, the sky was the goddamned limit. You could start from scratch, do whatever you wanted. You were not beholden to anyone's rules or preconceptions about who you should be. All the other queers and trannies felt the same way about themselves, right? You were out as a trans person, but evidently that wasn't enough to keep you from being a counter-revolutionary assimilationist sellout. You had to adopt prescribed, party-approved sense of aesthetics as well. You weren't straight anymore, but much to your surprise, you were still expected to be narrow. It was just a different ledge. As if wanting to be thin wasn't bad enough, the desire to pass was almost regarded as an act of oppression. An FM friend asked you passionately over dinner one night, "Why should anyone have to pass? And what if they don't? Does that mean they failed? How fucked up is that?" You agreed that it was highly fucked up, declining to mention that in this context you thought of the word pass in terms of motion and movement rather than success or failure. But hey, everyone's entitled to their own metaphors, even if they aren't quite so free to choose their own bodies. You couldn't help but notice that the majority of people most vocally opposed to the concept of passing were born female, and not likely to have been as emotionally brutalized by society's scorn of all things transgender. They were emotionally brutalized by a hell of a lot of other things. The threat of rape was a new element in your life. But they couldn't have felt as targeted as you did by seeing the barrage of media images of MDF transsexuals and transvestites as creatures to be mocked and laughed at. In America, nothing is funnier than a man in a dress. The abolition of gender sounded like a noble goal, but it seemed about as likely to happen in your lifetime as the return of Christ. You couldn't ignore the reality of the street now, where people would frequently point and laugh at you and say, "That's a guy." You didn't have the luxury of being above it all. If by attempting to pass, you became the Vichy France of World War gender, so be it. You wished you didn't mind. Occasionally, you even tried telling yourself that from now on, you'd try to be more evolved and progressive, that it was okay to be called he. Except that went against who you were. You respected the hell out of the folks who didn't care, but your own attempt at not caring worked about as well as when, pre-transition, you told yourself you were going to accept how things were and just be happy as a boy. The denial of self had been too much.